I found out my father had been married before, but only after he died, and not from him, and not from my mother, not from anyone who sat me down and said, "Hey, man, there's something you need to know." I found out doing his paperwork, and apparently he had a son, another son. Somewhere out there, there is a person who carries my father's name. And I found out the same way you find out about an unpaid bill. I've talked about my father in the series before, and the silence, the distance, the fact that we lived in the same house for decades and we're complete strangers. But this is the thing I haven't said yet, because this is a little bit harder. And not because it's dramatic, because my reaction wasn't dramatic. My reaction was, huh? Just, what the fuck? And that reaction tells you everything about the relationship we had. Here's what gets me. Not that he had another life before us. Everyone has lives before they get married or divorced or whatever. That's not the thing. The thing is, he knew. He knew there was a whole chapter of himself he had never shared with me. A marriage, a son, a whole version of him that existed before I did. And he decided, without ever saying so, that I didn't need to know. That it was filed under things we don't discuss, right next to emotions, personal history, and anything that requires eye contact. Let me tell you what I think he was actually doing. He wasn't hiding from him, he was hiding from himself. The sealed room wasn't about keeping me out, it was about never having to go in. That's a different thing, and that's important. When we grow up with a father who keeps himself hidden, you fill the gaps yourself. You take the 20% of him you can actually see, the routines, the rules, the reactions, and you build your story around it. And the problem with that story, obviously, is that it gets darker and more distorted the older you get because there's nothing real to correct it. I had been reacting to a version of my father that I literally invented for 40 years. And he was doing the exact same thing about me. Two people, 40 years, both writing fan fiction about each other, both completely convinced they had the other one figured out. And neither of us had a clue. Maybe your dad did the same thing. Different chapter, same sealed room. The specific details don't matter. What matters, whether there are things about him you don't know, things he chose not to tell you, things you've been hiding yourself for 40 years. If the answer is yes, you're not alone. And it's not unusual. That's just what sealed rooms do. My reaction when I found out wasn't anger and it wasn't grief. It was something quieter than both of those. It was, what? So there's a version of him I never had access to. A whole chapter I didn't know existed. And we lived in the same house. And I think about that brother. If that's what he is, somewhere out there, does he know about me? No, he doesn't. Did my father talk about us? Did he carry the same silence? Was he given the same name and nothing else? I don't know. I'll probably never know. That's what sealed rooms cost you. The problem isn't that he kept it. The problem is, what else did he keep? Because if there was one chapter I didn't know about, how many other chapters are there? And here's the thing that follows me around. If he kept that from me, what am I keeping from my kids? Not deliberately, obviously not cruelty, just by default. Because sealed rooms don't just get inherited, they get rebuilt. Here's the part that still breaks my brain. My father wasn't a bad man. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't absent in the obvious way. He showed up, he provided, and he was there. But he was so committed to keeping himself safe, to keeping things surface, that he took whole chapters of his life to his grave and left me with a character I invented. And I genuinely think, he believed he was protecting us. That's the version of love he was shown. Keep it contained, don't complicate things. What they don't know won't hurt them. But it did hurt. Not knowing hurts. The seal room hurts. The day I found out, I was sitting with his paperwork, just admin, boring stuff. The kind of thing nobody wants to do after someone dies. And there it was, a name, a date, a previous marriage. And I sat with it for a long time, not crying, not being angry, just sitting with it, thinking about all the conversations we never had, all the questions I never asked, all the times I assumed I knew him, and realizing I didn't. I loved someone I never really knew. If you have a father who's still alive, ask him something real. Not about work, not about sport, not about what's happening in the world. Something real. Who were you before I existed? What do you wish you would have done differently? What are you afraid of? Is there something you've never told me? He might deflect. He most probably will. But fucking ask anyway, because one day you'll be doing his paperwork and you might find a chapter you didn't know existed and you'll wish you'd asked. So the next video in the series is about my adoption, not the surface version, the part my father refused to tell me, the part I've been trying to piece together from the 20% I had access to, and what it means to spend your whole life trying to understand where you came from.